Hi, episode 1 of the WulfDen here. To join, we have Rio and Wolf. I am your host, Nako. Why don't you two introduce yourself? We'll start with Rio.
Hey, I'm Rio. I got fifth place in the PBG qualifiers with Nelga after top cut, and I got sixth place in the top cut June Bandai event with Nelga after Swiss.
I'm Wolf. I placed first place in the Top Cut Evo with War Gray with the Mass Day variant. And then I took sixth place in the last event for 1.5 in TAC. And that was with a Rookie Rush Imperial aggro deck. And that's where I am now.
My only notable achievements in BT4 thus far was a top 32 finish at the PPG event with a yellow Wargreymon with a 50-50 split between Slash and uh, Magna. So it was kind of a hybrid Wargreymon deck. Um, We're here to talk about BT4 today, though, and its meta progression, so to speak. You know, where it's come from, where it's going. Um, why don't we start with some of the early adaptive lists from Japan? Wolf, where do you think we started with BT4 lists? Specifically, I guess, Wargreymon.
So Wargrey definitely played heavy slash and heavy DP reductions. I remember that first week of the format where the decks were legal, everybody was playing the heavy DP minus, even in the rookie lineup. Some still kind of continued playing that after, but that is when it was most prominent, where everybody typically ran DP reduction. Rookies, level fours, you were seeing things like Gatomons, just nonstop DP reduction because everybody assumed with the deck they were just going to need to remove some more.
Yeah. Where'd you start with your BT4 lists, Rio?
BT4. BT4 was kind of a mess for me because I knew I wanted to play purple. Um, a lot of people were expecting that purple would take more of the Don Devi role because we had access to the early promos. Um, but that was kind of upset with the Charity Mom tournament. We had Metal Garurumon top with Mario's list, and from there on out, Metal Garurumon was considered the best purple deck. And I kind of just sort of took it there, worked on it, and it definitely not enough people are playing it. It's definitely an underperformer, but that's what I started at the early meta. And it did especially really well in the early meta because it could hide from the DP reduction, and people really didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, speaking of hiding, I think one of the earliest adaptions we saw in the BT4 meta was the raising meta, so to speak, and I think that's kind of why we saw the meta develop in the way that it did, because to dodge those early minus DP slash decks, you saw people camping and raising potentially um, like I guess the way a BT 1.5 1.0 Omni would, or like a Red Ragna potentially, um, and you could just camp from upwards to level 4, 5, 6, and you wouldn't really leave the raising area until you could potentially get some board presence or get something done. In the case of a War Greymon, that would be you'd maybe have War Greymon already out, or the memory to go into red or go into War Greymon, and you'd see them start swinging, really making an impact on the turn they came out. Um, and we saw Green OTK kind of do the same thing. Um, so I guess in that regard, what were the first changes really made to Wargreymon to adapt to this raising meta, Wolf?
So when it came to that, since everybody was going into the raising area, the DP reductions wasn't really doing anything consistently. It would pop now and then, but what would happen is you'd be sitting on things like Slash or a stack that minus DP, and you couldn't do anything with it, and so it wasn't getting any value. Which means we started seeing at first just more pure Mastamon decks pop up, and then you started seeing the mixture of uh, Magna Dramon, and whatnot with War Gray, so that it was more of an aggro build. You saw that with the Eli Hills deck and everything. You started seeing this whole, well, if we can't get value out of Slash and being able to pop things, why don't we go aggro and start getting big bodies that bring more bodies out so that you can get more impact off of your raising area instead of sitting on Slash and not being able to do anything with it. Now you could go into a Magna Dramon and could use it later. And then as time went on, that deck started to not perform as well as it was. And then we started seeing some hybrids of both Magnadramon and Slash and Mastamon and Slash, or just Mastamon. So it really started to evolve after that midway point. But going from beginning to middle, it definitely was a quick switch from Slash to Magnadramons. And then from middle to late, you're looking at more hybrids of either two Magnadramon with two Masty or Slash, depending on what the player was wanting and seeing.
Yeah, and to go along with that, that's basically what our data shows. We've been keeping in-house record of the various decks that have topped events to kind of track the overall progression of the meta. And what you are seeing is that really early on, the whether it was Magna or whether it was Slash, you were still seeing the yellow War Greymon decks being roughly 40 to 50% of top lists. Um, the other lists were fairly spread though, but I guess consistent. You had your 3 to 4 green OTK, purple Melga, rookie rush, 2CC, and then a spattering of 1 or 2 offs, such as Dan's Blue Imperial or the Don Devi that Rio had mentioned earlier. Um, I guess looking at these decks, which of these do you think potentially was had the most to gain from like the meta settling, Rio? The of these underperforming decks, which could have potentially come up quicker and really sought to combat this yellow war gray problem that we're seeing?
Of the like one-offs and stuff like that.
Or just the non-yellow decks, I guess.
I
Which do you
mean,
think competes best with it in our current format?
the problem is we do have that settling, but also like overall, but Wargray lists still become so varied that little advantages from like the settling in Wargray lists didn't really come into fruition. If you look at the numbers, you still just get random rogue decks topping. And sometimes you see more or less depending if there's more aggression or more of the DP reduction that week. It becomes kind of, luck of the draw as well. But things that benefited late, Black OTK got a lot better as the format progressed, because it is one of those decks with really odd DPs and effects that people don't know. So the DP reduction decks had a disadvantage had a strong advantage being able to delete those weird DPs. And the aggressive decks just didn't know how to deal with it. Blastmon was kind of weird. They didn't know to block, and it had a lot of weird interactions that gave it an edge, and it would win a lot of Wargray matches. That's the most notable one. Imperial Dramon's fast aggression really took both the beginning and the end of the meta by surprise. Um, Other notable decks that we saw, like Imperial is just the big one I've been thinking of a lot recently because we saw 3 tops last weekend. Not last weekend, the weekend before with the Bandai events, which was really unexpected because in the middle of the meta, we saw no Imperial. There was zero, not a single topping Imperialist for like 2-3 weeks. I'm trying to think. There's just one gets by every now and then, either by being lucky or it's again these big tournaments. You dodge your bad matchups, and that's how these decks get here.
Yeah, it's one thing to note, I guess, is that like wow, looking at top 16 is a good indicator of potentially strong decks or potentially strong players playing strong decks or some combination of the two. You do get lucky sometimes, and that's why like we've got a yellow shine list showing up here, not even running War Gray, from 26 top cut, or purple mallow, even more recently showing up, these one-off decks that, you know, by some other matchup or some other draw potentially, like you can high roll your way to topping events with decks that potentially, when given to a handful of players, wouldn't show equivalent results. Um, but I guess with the most room for discussion, where do you two feel that green's kind of lies at? We did see early on people had rotated and moved towards that green OTK variant, running for promo Palmons, having access to both the promos, really powering up green and that OTK, and just that combination of being able to blow the whole stack and just asking your opponent to find an answer in a single turn or losing. And we really saw that shift over more towards the control variant that focuses more on Hercules Kabuterimon or Nidhogg. And but like where do you think green really has its strength? I guess we'll start with Wolf. Between the OTK and the control, somewhere in between, a little bit of both, or is it really one or the other, in your opinion?
So OTK has the plus side that it's very solved. You don't see much variation in the list at all, except for maybe 1 to 2 cards, and so it does what it does. And someone seems to always high roll and get it through. But that is the one downside, is it does got to high roll a bit through a whole tournament, and so the more rounds there are, the more it has to do. People are doing it, but that's why you start to see more and more greens fall off about mid tournament, just because they start to this point where they can't keep the drive going and they fall off. However, it is considered the stronger of the two variants, I think mainly because it's solved and it's always threatening that whole lethal of killing a stack out of nowhere. And not every deck can bounce back. Uh, I think commonly yellow doesn't have as much issues with it if it's running enough healing, because it bounces back from the OTK hit, heals, clears the board, and all of a sudden OTK starts to lose its aggressiveness and all that, and it no longer has the advantage, and then it starts to lose from there. If yellow can do that, it tends to dominate the OTK decks. That is where the control deck has its strength. I think green control as a whole, in my opinion, is the better variant, even though a lot of people will argue for OTK. The reason why I believe that is its matchups are better as a whole. It gives yellow a hard time, especially if it's not either aggressive enough or doesn't have enough healing and stuff like that. Some of the variants, yellow can just start to have problems because it doesn't clear as much anymore with slashes and stuff like that disappearing. And so OTK kind of, control kind of keeps picking away at yellow and can kind of cause a lot of problems for it. Plus, when you start looking at security control, which is another big time deck that shows up more and more as tournaments go on, I think the control variant also has a better matchup against that, because it can keep clearing the field while taking away cards from the security control, which I think is a lot better than the OTK, because the OTK goes, what am I going to do now? And a lot of times its play is trying to just get lucky and go in for a big hit and hope there's not removal in the stack, which tends to be that there actually is, and so it just kind of runs out of steam too easily. Uh, so I think the control variant's better. I think it has a place. The downside to control is it seems like it's having a hard time for people to find that perfect build. Everybody says my build's the best, and it just keeps changing person to person, and so you have just kind of this conflict of which version's actually the best, and it's all over the place. Fives, sixes, nobody can seem to say, okay, this is what I want, think is best, and there's only 2 to 3 cards that are getting switched. It's every time you look from one green list to the next, when it comes to control, all of a sudden it's like 5 to 10 cards are changing throughout the deck, and it's causing a lot of variance. And I think it just makes it to where a lot of people don't play the deck because they don't know where to go with it.
What are your thoughts, Rio?
Uh, I originally thought very similarly to Wolf, but OTK has been picking up more steam lately. And I've been seeing, it more in tournaments. And players have, let me back things up a little bit. OTK was by far the most hyped deck for this format during the early meta, besides Wargrey.
Mm.
It was a deck that was supposed to be the contender for Wargrave, the best deck of the format besides Wargrave, and it fell flat on its face. The deck underperformed heavily during the first few weeks of tournaments, with some sparse toppings, but still nothing you would expect of the second best deck.
Uh,
And then Control took the reins, and we had this mid format where Control was growing more popular and stuff. Sorry, what were you saying, Echo?
I didn't want to interrupt you, but would you say potentially access to promo Palmon would be part of that? I know there was a lot of people struggled getting access to the Great Legends power packs and obtaining play sets. I don't even have a full play set of the promo Palmons myself. Would you say that
Like,
potentially part of why um, OTK hadn't blossomed the way that people had thought it was, especially as War Gray cards fell in price over the time, and promo Palmon's kind of maintained a pretty solid. Like at one point, it was $40. I think it's down to like 25 right now, as of the recording of this podcast. But um, even then, like a deck that could have potentially done better earlier and topped would have potentially maintained a higher percentage of the meta. Do you believe that had we had access to promo Palmon in packs, that could have changed?
it is potentially, but the thing is also there were so many people playing it. Like there were large numbers of people playing the OTK deck, regardless of the price. The reason why the price was so high is because so many buying was a lot of competitive people are buying it to play it. So there was a huge turnout for it. They just weren't topping as much as yellow or gray players, or anything that we've seen later in the meta.
Mm,
Um, so definitely it could have lowered the turnout, but we still saw a strong turnout. And the big reason I think we didn't see as good as results for the deck is something that we see a change in the play style of the deck, where people are being a little bit more hesitant and a little bit more scared of security and sort of okay, I don't need to do the combo to win the game. They're playing less chaos mons, and the deck is solved minus one or two cards, but those one or two cards that they've changed every now and then really help. They've seen more people playing the Mega Carbotarimon that burns, which is really good in the 2CC matchup. You see people changing up the eggs, people playing less flower cannons to make it a little bit more consistent control. And by these little changes, um, you make the deck on its explosive turn a little safer to play, a little bit more consistent. You see things like people digibursting for two, digibursting only once the first time for the first swing to reduce how many security checks it does so it survives longer. Um, you see people not even swinging with the Grand Quagamon. Instead of swinging with it, they swing over something to get that burn off. So
mm,
little things like that help the deck. A lot of people also have opted not to even go into Chaosmon. They'll just swing with the Grand Quagamon and then finish the game off with a Mimi, swing with a rookie for game. Little things like that people are not tunnel visualing the combo so much and more plays available in the deck than even control has access to has given the deck really staying power in the end of the meta, and we're seeing an increase in OTK to the level of how many tops we're seeing with Wargray and stuff.
mm.
So the results suggest that OTK is better. Even in these large tournaments, they're doing better than control right now.
In regards to the developments that OTK have made, I know you mentioned them only swapping one or two cards. Um,
Mm,
which cards? So I guess they've moved more towards the five cost inheritable that trashes security. Um,
yes.
what have they removed? I think there was a large debate on whether like Stingmon was a good card or not, whether that memory mattered. I remember um having a discussion with someone about whether I almost feel like Stingmon, while potentially valuable for the one cost Evo and for the slot that it offered, I felt as though it baited me into making more misplays because I was trying to get that one memory.
Hmm.
And whereas if that wasn't in my inheritable stack, if that just wasn't something I had to consider, I wouldn't have made that miss swing or, attack with something I shouldn't have. And it would have potentially changed the game state in a beneficial manner for me.
So the big changes is people either opt for going for the burn or the Lilamon. Uh, Essentially, they do similar things. Whereas the burn lets you do damage while controlling the field if your opponent's being aggressive, and the Lilamon lets you tap something, then go Grand Quagamon and swing over something, and then do the Chaosmon combo. They both kind of control the board a bit more than previous control decks are used to doing. Um, that's again big change. There's a big debate on eggs. And then the fact that Chaosmon went down to 3 is a
So,
big thing.
with the
That
changes
the
that happened with the Green OTK and like I guess their consolidation of their ratios and whatnot, like they really found what made OTK tick. Um, do you believe that there's a chance that Control either adopts a small percentage of the OTK package to become a potentially better deck, or do you think like the pure OTK maximum ratios with no Hercs is potentially the best way to run green in BT4?
I'm not quite sure. We've been seeing some top players play hybrid versions. Recently, we had Hong's top 8 at the last event. So there's definitely a lot of pros to doing the hybrid. Hybrid also runs the problem that you don't always draw the level 6 you want to see. Is what I've heard from people playing the hybrid version. Um, I think theoretically, just having more, routes and plays is beneficial. But we just haven't seen a lot of people switch to hybrid yet. So we really don't know from a tournament standpoint, like, is it going to be actually better? But we still have a lot of people playing both control and OTK, and right now it seems like OTK is the best one.
So, speaking of hybrids, I guess we'll transition back to the other uh, horse in this race, Yellow. You know, Yellow's seen a lot of variation over the course of the meta, as we've mentioned, starting with the slash variants, moving into a hybrid variant of its own right, slash Magna, um, and now, I guess, with Wolf potentially being one of the pioneers of it, the, you know, Magna, uh, Masty, Wargrey listings. I guess what were your ideas behind it, Wolf, and like what benefits did you really see to adding in the Mastamon as opposed to the Slash, and like with what approach did you really like? What did you want to solve with this new list of yours?
So there was two reasons to the whole Masty setup. First one being the security control matchup. Uh, Yellow can beat it without the Masty. However, uh, it was nice to have an additional way to deal with it, to be able to take cards off the security stack without actually having to attack in, with being able to build a board, getting more immediate bodies and payoff for your Digivolution was nice. That's why I found it better than Slash when you had to compare the two. Is Slash required something to be on the board for me to get the value. If I couldn't, or it wasn't a high enough DP, then I wasted a Slash and it was a 6 that sat there and didn't feel good. Massey was getting value and more times than not. I mean, there was the occasional brick where it's your first 6 and you don't have a body in there, but for the most part, it was there so that it can consistently deal with security control a little bit more, so you had more outs and could build that early game aggression towards security control a little bit more without getting hit by options. And then, I mean, the main reason why it's better than Slash in a lot of cases is that it's less reactive. So it's a little bit more like playing solitaire and just not caring as much as what the opponent's doing, which means it's more uh, it's able to easily deal with the opponent a little bit easier depending on what they're wanting to do, so you don't have to it's more adaptive, so you don't have to go, okay, I'm playing Slash, so I need to sit here and just wait for my opponent to do something. And it's not playing Magna or just Magna kind of variant to where you're going, okay, I'm just going to go aggressive and that's it, and then I have zero ways to deal with anything or have no counterplay. Master kind of feels like that happy medium because it's got aggressive plays, it fills the board, but because of the type of cards you're playing in the rest of the lineup, it's able to heal and play a little bit more reactively as well. So if you're in a situation like you're facing a green OTK that it's hurt you a little too much, Master can bounce back with bringing back Gatomons and Patamons and heal while still being able to do other things. So overall, the best answer I give is security control. That was the main reason why it came to be. And I wanted to be able to play something that wasn't 100% reactive.
So we've now, I guess, seen from two different perspectives how these decks tackle security control. We might as well discuss it itself directly, not just how to beat it, but like kind of what makes it tick. At least in my opinion, this was supposed to be the low of 2CC. I know that moving forward, it's going to become one of the potentially best decks in the format, and not just show up, but will be like a sizable portion of topping lists. But the BT4 variant, I guess I didn't really expect, and I didn't really see doing as well with what it got as it has done. Especially seeing that for the month of June specifically, um, all these different decks show up like in response to 2CC or to counter 2CC, and it changes just the framework for the rest of the meta, just its sheer existence. It's such a different deck, such an out there deck in the vein that Megazoo was, which actually is weirdly absent from these. I remember like the Sprite Megazoo being pretty touted as a solid deck moving into BT4, and kind of just evaporated in favor of other unconventional decks. I guess 2CC and Rookie Rush being the only two at the moment. Um, so we'll start with Rio. Like, what do you think like a BT4 without 2CC looks like, or what impact has 2CC had on the BT4 meta in North America?
I mean, to be honest, it really hasn't changed the meta as much as we attribute it to. Yes, we're teching a lot of things, and like things like War Mastery probably wouldn't be as discovered, and aggression wouldn't be as valued, um, if it wasn't for 2CC. But for the most part, we're probably going to be playing the same decks. 2CC is topping, but is not seeing great showing in most tournaments. We're getting to the end of the meta. That's becoming less and less true. We see more people playing 2CC. But like for my top cut finish, I didn't play a single 2CC list, and a lot of people I talked to didn't play a single 2CC list. Um, it's not to the point that it's prominent in the meta, but you expect to see it once or twice every now and then. And then you also have tournaments where 2CC is just really dominant. I did a local sort of cash tournament around 32 people, and we did have like 10 people playing 2CC. And things like that happens with smaller tournaments. But in the bigger tournaments, we're seeing, maybe 20, 30 people playing out of 200 2CC lists. Um, and you can really easily dodge it. So it doesn't have as much of an impact as we think it does. It just really hurts when we see the match and we're not ready for it.
So, since we don't have the data, we only really have like talking to people and really working with whatever information we do have. So would you say that 2CC, the showings that it's had, isn't showing that it is solidly that 10 to 15 to maybe 20% of the meta that we're seeing in the top cuts? It might be potentially lower than that, and we just have some outliers doing well? Or would you say that it's potentially more than 20-25% of the meta are playing it, they're just not making it to that top cut, so we're not seeing it represented in that manner?
I think it's so it depends on the tournament. There are tournaments, especially if when 2CC gets like a topping, the next tournament has about 20 to 30% showing on 2CC. What happens is they play against each other a lot, they get ties or losses, and they kind of kick themselves out of the tournament. So regardless of like how many 2CC players actually show up, either 20 or 30%, or just like 10%, we always get around the same percentage of people in top cut.
I
I
know.
will
Oh, go ahead, Wolf.
I will say that if you get a tie in those first few rounds, if you manage to get a tie, your chances of seeing them increases by tenfold. Because what's going to happen is the ones that are still in the running in those mid area, you're now going to start getting paired against all the 2CCs that tied over and over and over again until they get their next loss to where they're going to go, okay, I'm gone. So I will say the reason why I think the average player doesn't see them as much is because they're getting at least one tie underneath their belt, and so they're not getting paired against the people with the one loss, or two losses or whatever, and so people are dodging them heavily. The moment you get in that one tie bracket, though, you start seeing them a lot more often.
That is something to note. I was just gonna share a small anecdote that 2CC did pop up in my local meta as well, and where I think out of the 18 to 25 people that show up week to week, at one point there were like 6 or 7 people playing 2CC, and it got to the point where in round 2, 2 of them having a win, they matched each other. They immediately pulled out a pad of paper and were counting cards in deck from turn 1, and it went to 2 cards in deck. The one of them decked the other one out, and that's just how that matchup plays. I know, as someone who might play a decent amount of 2CC and is really looking into the intricacies of 2CC and BT5, the idea of a meta dominated by it and the mirror match is something I would potentially avoid the deck entirely for. So moving from 2CC, looking at what we've got now and what we've seen in the meta, the rise of the altered yellow or gray lists, the green coming and going, and the changes that comes with it, the rise of 2CC. I guess where do we see the meta going from here? We still have 2, potentially 3, if the August 14th tournament is also BT4. Potentially have 3 major tournaments left. So for those that remain, where do you two see the meta going? Like, will we see the same percentage of War Greymon? Will we see the War Masty hold strong? Because as of the most recent July events, we've got basically like 30 to 40% of the meta is a combination of the War Greymon and the War Masty builds. So War Greymon's basically held the same percentage of the meta that it's held since week 1. I guess we'll start with Wolf.
So going off what I think is going to happen, I'm kind of basing this off of what happened with the last set of tournaments, going from 1.5 into BT4, with a tournament that I placed top 8 in. I believe July 30th event is going to be pretty much what we're seeing. It's just going to be off of what people are predicting they're going to see more of, maybe playing the counter of. I think we're going to see the same rotation of few decks that we see a lot of. It's just more of where everybody's feeling, and then one of them is going to be in a heavier representation, which is pretty much what we've been seeing. We'll have tournaments where War Gray is super high in numbers because everybody feels like War Gray is good, or all of a sudden 2CC is really high because everybody feels that's good, or we'll see a lot more green OTKs because everybody feels that good. So I think it'll be either we'll see a good mix of those three heavily towards the top, or we're going to start seeing this point where one of them is heavier because everybody thought that was going to be the good deck for that day, and so we see more of them. July 30th tournament, I feel, will be pretty normalized and not too crazy. Now, the 7th tournament, going off of what happened with the last end of meta, and because people are starting to get cards pre-release, people are wanting to switch over. Maybe they've already started switching over decks. I expect this tournament to be a lot more random and your numbers to all of a sudden be all over the place, and seeing some of the rogue decks rising, seeing a couple decks that are designed with current meta but putting them together for the new meta. Like maybe the ratios are their future deck with just the cards from BT5 replaced with BT4 versions, but they basically have the deck built for BT5, which is some BT4 replacements, stuff like that. So I expect a lot more random to happen. Plus, people just trying new decks out just because it's the last tournament in the meta. So that's a lot of times where you'll see decks that maybe they haven't played before. That's when you go, oh, I wanted to play Red Omni this whole time, or I wanted to play Imperial this time. And all of a sudden, you see that deck come out because they didn't play it all meta and they wanted to play the BT4 variant of it. So now all of a sudden they're bringing it out. So I think July 30th we'll see more of a normalized what we've been seeing. August 7th, I would expect to see a lot more randomness.
What are your thoughts, Rio?
Yeah. I agree with Wolf. We'll probably see a lot of randomness around this time last format. We saw the rise of Blue Omni, Mono Red Crest Garurumon, and a lot of these like weird rogue decks that were surprisingly really good. So I'm expecting to see stuff like hybrid blue, hybrid red, some Don Devi, Plutomon shenanigans. Um, I have a strong feeling that we're going to see probably a blue in top 16. That's not Rookie Rusher and Pildramon in the August 7th tournament. Um, so it's always a time to test stuff like that. I also think in anticipation for BT5, people are going to play more of 2CC and more green OTK. I think the people who are like, competitive players are going to go to 2CC and green OTK as a way to secure one last win in this format. Wargray will obviously always see a steady amount of play, but I don't think it's going to be overwhelmingly. I think it's going to be similar to what we saw earlier in the format, just maybe a little bit less of a turnout with more people playing rogue decks overall. Um, I don't know. There's not really a reason for the meta to change too much. I think green OTK is a little bit more popular now is the last few tournaments, and I think it might continue like that. 2CC is also growing a little bit more popular, so we probably will see a little bit more of that. Yeah, that's trying to think anything else. I do really expect to see a blue hybrid in a topping list. Um,
Not just
I
like a
think
blue imperialist, or not just a blue rookie variant, like a straight up like ancient
no,
Garuru list hybrid.
yeah, I do expect to see some like ancient Garurumon or blue Omni list in top 16 for the August 7th tournament.
Hmm.
I've heard some people talking about it and trying to play test it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a few of those around.
Well, I definitely think that the 31st will have um, some weird oddity decks, the rogue decks that we'd mentioned. I don't see people playing that off meta for the August 7th tournament because it is potentially people's first opportunity to steal a nationals invite. So if they can do it in a meta that they feel as though is potentially solved, or at least a meta in which they've been heavily practiced in as we've been playing it for the last, two so months or so, um, I see as that meta being almost more standard, more tight to the top than we've seen even some of the previous earlier builds. Less of that, like your top 8 being exclusively War Gray, Green, and then with like one or two Rookie Rush slash 2CC slash other decks in there. I would say that like you might see a full 16 of like the big three, at least for August 7th specifically, because um, while it is at the end of BT4 and potentially the last, hopefully the last tournament of BT4 as far as Evo Cups are concerned, um, I do think the like while that Omnimon is a chase prize, a Nationals invite is something that is potentially irreplaceable, and for someone to be able to snag an invite in BT4 and then not have to worry about it for all of 5 and 6, and I think EX will be out by the time the Nationals season actually closes, but um, I think that's something that people will take the advantage to do what they know, really.
I
So in
get
your
what you
Yep.
mean, but the thing is, this is their last chance to play these rogue decks, so a lot of people jump to that opportunity, and I think it's dangerous to call the meta solved because
Hmm.
even though a lot of decks are solved, I would never call the meta solved, especially in Digimon, where surprises and small changes in builds or like just not knowing where your opponent is doing is such a big advantage. With the Rise of War, Masty was like the biggest example of this. When you play a deck where your opponent isn't completely knowing what the strategy is or doesn't really understand what you're going for, you have a higher chance of winning. And that's why we saw this explosive turnout of War Masty. It's not only a really good deck, people weren't expecting Mastimon.
You were gonna
So
say something,
rogue
Wolf?
decks,
Yeah, I was
yeah,
basically going to say the same thing. You can't underestimate the rogue deck because what the rogue deck does is it surprises somebody and it wins matches. So I would not be surprised to see a chunk of rogue decks in the 16, even if half of them or the winner is one of the decks that is kind of solved. I would expect to see some rogue decks doing some damage, and I would like again the hybrid blue is one of the examples I would count down on seeing because it's had some sparks in the chunk of tournaments. It just hasn't done anything big at the uh, official events yet. So that's definitely one I could see popping up. We've already seen Black start to pop up a little bit because of what it can do and its rogue-like abilities. So I would not underestimate the rogue decks in that last tournament. And going off the last meta and the meta before that, the rogue decks tend to rise on that last week a lot more often.
Hmm. So, um, what Rio mentioned really, I feel we never touched on the idea of just playing a deck that the opponent doesn't know what you're playing. I do think is very valuable, and it's something I felt playing Yellow War Gray. When if someone can sit down and I hatch an egg and they immediately know every card in my deck, you're at a significant disadvantage in this card game. Like, I mean, not enough to lose, like enough. War Greymon is still, one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the format. Um, but I felt that while playing other decks that they don't know exactly what your best turn is or what your real ceiling is or what you're aiming to do, and if they don't know that they can get rid of your 6, fine, but you really can't touch that other 5 because that's the one that you really need to go off next turn. And just whatever combination of plays you need to make, it's something that is a little underrated. And when you're going up the chain and you're playing cards and your opponent has to really sit there and look at what you're playing and maybe even like read your cards. Like, have I even seen this card get played before? I know I played against um, a red War Greymon list that ran a couple cards I had never seen in play before at all, and I had to have like Digimon card.dev pulled up next to me and like reading these cards as they're played. What does that card do? What is its inheritable? What, like, that I think that's something that um is definitely undervalued in the current meta.
yeah. And you brought up Red War Gray. I actually think Red War Gray is another contender for stealing a top 16 spot at the next two tournaments.
Like, just a full red War Gray with the intention of blowing over whatever 2cc it comes across.
Yeah, it has a lot of interesting text for 2cc, and it has some interesting access to removal that yellow does not. And we're not seeing any Craniumon, so red removal is really not at a disadvantage at all. Um, it does have some, it doesn't have the greatest rookie pool, but it's a very explosive deck, and I think it's also underrated. We did see one top recently at Carta, but basically I think that's the only top that I remember seeing for it.
How do you think the Reds' base is at the moment? I know um, red kind of was one of those colors that didn't really see a whole lot of play for all of BT4. How do you think that their ratios really break down? Because I know that's one thing that I think yellow and green specifically, like, their strength comes from their flexibility in their rookies and their champions, and just their ability to really like put out power at those various levels of the Digivolution chain. It's not just their top cards, I guess, really.
Red has a lot of problems. if we're gonna talk about red, I can talk about endlessly, but it has the curse of level 7s without any draw power in the deck. So you have to do really weird ratios to get your level 7s, which is most of the, explosive turns for red. And the color as a whole has almost zero draw power, with the exception being Heirs of Dragon is the only playable draw card right now. We might see in future sets Ties Memory or whatever the promo card is, see some play, but Heirs of Dragons is realistically your only draw card in
Mm,
the whole color. So it can't reliably get into its pieces consistently to win in big tournaments. Also, a lot of its rookies boost DP, and in a low DP format, that's really not helpful. Um, Most Digimon cards right now cap at 11k DP. So raising, Wargrave from 11 to 15 is excessive, and that's what red cards really specialize in at the rookie level.
mm.
Basically, red needs the new egg that it's getting next set, which starts giving you an extra draw option.
The BT5 Koromon?
Coromon, yeah, because now you start getting an egg that has a potential drawing if you're building the deck around it.
Mm. No, that
It
makes
just doesn't
Yeah,
sense.
have that consistent let's draw when attacking or anything like that that a chunk of the other colors do.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
I think kind of taking a step back a little, like the colors that we've seen do strong in BT4, I think were really represented by the cards that had the most flexibility in their ranks, their threes, their fours, their rookies, um, and just the ability for me to sit here and say like, oh man, am I gonna run? You've just rookies that do a multitude of different tasks. You've got recovery Salamon, recovering you like the sustainment. It's only at a 4 cost. I mean, 4 cost rookie's pretty expensive, but you can always just evo it. Um, or I guess the other 4 cost being promo Patamon, on play recover one. It's very conditional, but it's there. Especially in a list that runs Mastamon and Wargreymon, that recovery for one at 0 um, is pretty, or I guess at 1 or fewer. So it's pretty relevant. And then you've got on the other end, you've got your Bushy, the on play, just pull an extra attack out of nowhere, or you've got Pulsemon, the jack of all trades. You know, either the you know at the 3 mark gaining 1 memory and drawing you a card. But I think it's like that's just the rookies right there, and the flexibility offered at these ratios is just unmatched between other cards. Like if you, I guess you look what Red's doing. What can Red do at the rookie level with such the variety and options that Yellow can do?
if that's a question, the answer is nothing really.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, red doesn't really get a lot of options. It's kind of okay. These are your best ones, and that's it. There's a little bit of tech choice, but not much.
Hmm.
It's pretty much what sixes and sevens are you looking to run? Okay, the rest is built around that. And the ones for those decks are pretty set. I've seen very little variation in the red decks once they have their six or sevens chosen.
Now, I guess
Yeah,
kind of another big picture question. They're kind of just coming to me as I'm thinking about them. Like, so if Red's problem or Red's difficulty has been either card draw or inflexibility of its rookies, um, what I know we haven't seen a lot of variation now. Something I thought would have been more of an issue with this format, something that I thought would have been a real argument to be made, is which 7 to run in green, with green giving access to 2 this format. But you saw very little Valderarm play among green lists, if any. Like, I,
there
I
were a few topping lists.
I've played against none of them. I know they're there, but just the fact that like we got 2 7s in green and they exclusively play the regular Chaosmon, the OTK Chaosmon, or nothing potentially, you know, um, with the control lists opting usually just not to run 7s potentially, like in favor of more options and tamers. Um, Because I think level 7s were something that were holding back these, not holding back these colors, especially not in the name of yellow, but like having 7s as a whole just gives these decks more options, just literal options. Like it's another draw, it makes your body bigger, and even if, on the following turns Valderarm is nothing but a 14k beat stick, um, at least with an Angelwoman underneath it, it still does something.
14K speed stick is really hard to deal with in this format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like because the
Um,
DP minuses just don't get there, right? Like
they don't get
unless it's
there.
another Valderarm.
When Valdarm's on the field, it almost always stays on the field.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
with regular Chaos Mon, I mean the reason why they go towards it is because it fits Green's overall goal better, and it's in both Greens because in the OTK you can get that other swing off with it, and then in the controlled version, the reason why it's better is because it's got the piercing and can be doing what it's doing, so it works with the control as well better. Um, the Volder arms, I haven't seen in OTK at least at all. In Control, I have seen it plenty of times as a one of, like a 2-1 split. So that's there for an option because there's still turns where Valderarm's good. It's just in the green matchup because of everything else it's doing, it's just not good as often.
yeah, it's very rare, but Valdarm has shown up in OTK lists. Completely foregoing the Chaos Mon for Valdarm and focusing the OTK only on Grand Quagamon.
Hmm.
It's
Now,
not really a OTK anymore, but I have
yeah,
seen lists like that.
just again thinking, did we ever really see any blacklists utilize Chaosmon, or did it just they just kind of skip it entirely? I don't
It's
think.
mostly been skipped.
Yeah, like because you've already got Zubagon, you're doing whatever you need to do in your OTK without having to Evo into 7. But I mean, just even having the option, like I guess black just isn't seen play enough to like warrant the experimentation. I don't know.
No, early Black played Chaosmon. The big problem with Black OTK playing Chaosmon is that like it doesn't really add anything. The Black Wargrey OTK can OTK by itself. Um and even if it doesn't, it clears all the security in a way that you don't even need the Chaosmon.
Hmm.
Um it's kind of in a weird place where you just don't need to play it. It's not needed at all. You rather leave your level 7 slot for, tech options like Millennial Mon, like Alter S. At most you play one Chaos Mon.
Yeah, I completely forgot. But Millennium also goes off of 6s. We've seen so few black decks this format or period. Black is just by far the most struggling color, is it not? Like,
It is struggling because it doesn't have what it needs yet.
hmm,
And it's gonna be it's gonna get a lot of pieces in the next two sets.
that's good.
But right now, the only competent strategy for black is the OTK variant. Craniummon just doesn't feel good this format because it doesn't really stop anything.
Hmm.
And D Brigade is incomplete. D Brigade is still missing some more copies of Commandramon and is missing the draw power it gets from the starter decks.
Which starter
Part
decks?
of the
The blue starter decks, blue and red for BT6, BT5.
I was wondering why the black deck would need the blue and red starter decks. That's why I was confused.
Oh yeah, so they get access to security Digimon, the blue and red security Digimon.
Oh, okay,
It
yep.
likes the
I know
blue
what you're talking
one the
about.
most.
So they run them
Um,
regardless of the color of their deck, right? Like,
oh yeah, because they're hard plays.
yeah, that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
so talked about black a little bit, I guess. Where where do you think purple's sat at? I guess Rio. I know you're kind of the local purple expert. You ran your Melga list for your two top eights, so
Yeah, in the BT format or in the coming meta?
in four for now at least. Like, do you think it performed? Do you think it underperformed? Do you think it overperformed, or do you feel like it was equivocally representative to how good it was. You know, it's constantly maybe a 1, maybe a 2 of in a top 16, or, you know, sometimes entirely absent from top 16 lists.
Uh, I am of the strong opinion that it underperformed. But purple has the problem that it is a deck that has access to all this draw power, but also is a deck that has to play so many bricks to get where it's going, or like roadblocks. Um, so as much as I want to say purple is a great deck, and good pilots can get it far, um, it also I think did as well as it was gonna do, regardless of how many people were playing it. Because definitely I feel like people were not taking purple as seriously as they could. And I think Metal Gurumon took the spotlight away from a lot of other purple decks that could have done really well. Malamyotismon, I feel like, was heavily underrepresented. Don Devi could have gotten more proper attention and probably will in future sets. Um, so in a lot of ways underperformed, but in a lot of ways exactly what I expected. One or two top 16 finishes every tournament.
I think that Don Devi deck suffers the same problem as the OTK, green OTK potentially saw a little bit of, at least. Is that just that the tournament pack 1 Demi Devis, or the promo BT4 Demi, just purple's full of promos, especially in the Don Devi list. Like,
It did really suffer that, and not really the power up, not sorry, the dash, yeah, power up pack one.
mhm,
It was more the tournament pack one,
yeah,
because to get a playset of it was almost $200.
mhm, yeah.
Um,
I picked up my playset for 30 apiece, so that's
yeah,
I really wanted to play that deck, and I felt like I probably overpaid for it, but like I mean, just comparability of like prices of strengths to cards, like tournament pack 1 Demi Devi being $30 when I purchased. I don't know what it is right now, whereas you've
it's
got
40.
Valderarm at 10, War Gray at like maybe 15, maybe 10 right now. Like, you could, for half the price for, meta defining. I mean, it's half the price of Lucimon itself, secret rare. It's crazy. So, you still think Melga is like the way to go in BT4? If BT4, was the end of Digimon, and we kept moving forward, you'd say that, like, you'd be playing Melga purple moving forward.
I would play Melga. Melga has, even though it's arguably a little bit more bricky than some of the other colors, it has a lot more answers to boards, has more of an explosive turn, and more ways to get out of bricks than other decks in the
Hmm.
purple color.
What about you, Wolf? If BT4 was the last set of Digimon, if this was the set to be played, or at least if there was some sort of freeze for competitive purposes, what deck would you be playing moving forward?
At the moment, Lord Nightmon, unless something else sparks me more.
BT4,
There's
Wolf.
BT4.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Probably still Wargray. It's just it has so much versatility.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the choices. I mean, you got like what 3 to 4 different decks you could build from Yellow Wargray alone, switching up rookies, fours, fives. So many things you could do that if I had to, I would probably play that all the way through.
So, I guess that's your predictions, or at least what, if you guys were trying to top the August 7th tournament, potentially the last tournament of BT4, that those are the decks you two would be taking.
I would
Ye-
have to say what the core tournament this weekend would be, but for this weekend I'm taking Melga. I'll probably continue to take Melga unless I have some reason to play something else. The issue also I have with that question is at this point in the meta, I don't have a lot of incentive to learn another deck.
Hmm,
And the deck I can perform the best with is Melka. It's the one I've played so much. I know the deck inside and out, and I've made the little changes I need to for the meta.
that's fair.
Potentially I could play Green OTK or Control because I have play tested those decks extensively, and like I know how to play the decks. It's just you know, um, people are known for decks for reasons. You
Mm-hmm.
just get the inside and out of a deck, and it's what you're gonna hold on to.
Yeah. So, Wolf, what do you What are you thinking for this next couple tournaments? I know you said you're kind of you're gonna try something new, but like if this was like a nationals level situation that you had to take a BT4 deck and compete at the highest level, what would you take?
Yeah. So I want to say yellow war gray. I mean, obviously because of the positioning of this tournament, I'm questioning it mainly because I want to start getting the deck ready for next format. It just happens to be that that tournament happens pretty much right after release, so I might be taking something different specifically for the fact of I want to get that deck ready for that format, and there's a couple other decks I could play.
Hmm.
I haven't decided 100% sure on that, but if I wasn't going to take Yellow War Gray, a couple decks that are higher on my list would be probably sneaking in with something like Imperial or playing Green OTK probably.
Okay. So I believe that's about all the time we have. Thank you two for coming. Do you have any more last thoughts before we close it out?
Not from me.
Yep.
No, the
Okay.
format was fun.
Yeah.
Short, but fun.
Well, hopefully BT5 offers us a change up, even if it won't happen until the potentially after the August 7th, if not the 14th tournament. So yeah, that's all the time we have, and this will be the first of the WulfDen podcast. Stay tuned for more. Thank you, and have a good day.